Hello, my name is Patricia Lewis and I am a reader in management in the business school here at the University of Kent. My area of research is gender and organisation studies, and I'm particularly interested in exclusion and inclusion processes within organisations. What I'm interested in is how are certain people identified as leadership or management material? How is it that certain people can get access to leadership positions with large salaries attached to them, and other people are perceived as not appropriate? Historically, women were seen as not appropriate to hold leadership positions, and this was often ascribed to their femininity. They were too passive, too emotional, too irrational, incapable of acting rationally within an organisational context and taking the tough and strong decisions that were required for competitive success. However, in recent years, largely I think from the 1990s onwards, there's been a complete shift from seeing femininity as a liability, so therefore women couldn't be leaders. It is argued that femininity is a crucial asset for organisational success. And this has given rise to the emergence of the figure of the feminine leader. This culminated after the financial crisis in 2008 with many newspaper articles arguing that women were the managers of the future. Women would lead us out of the mess that the men made. Women would clean up and tidy up, perform the cultural duty that they've always done, and set us on the path to greatness again. Within that context, we might want to ask ourselves two questions. What has led to, if you like, this revaluing of femininity from it's not a liability to seeing it as a crucial asset? And the other question we might like to ask is, why have women not gained more advantage from this? Why do we still worry about the gender composition of corporate boards? Why is it that most leaders aren't women now? In answering those questions, I am going to draw on the concept of post-feminism. Okay? But before we do this, I just want to make a quick qualification to the argument that I'm making. And you will notice that the title of this presentation is not the female leader, it is the feminine leader. And there's a very important reason for that. Female refers to physical characteristics, the actual physical human body of an individual and a female physical body, whereas feminine refers to the cultural practices and behaviours required of a person with a female body. So an equation is made between female equals feminine and male equals masculine. However, in recent years, there has been a change in how gender is understood within the context of organisational studies. And rather than seeing it as some essence inherent to an individual, we now understand femininity and masculinity as social practices, something we do. And what this means is that this disrupts, if you like, the equation between female equals feminine and male equals masculine. It means that women can do masculinity and men can do femininity. We can have a feminine man and a masculine woman. This is particularly important in the context of living in a post-feminist gender regime. Okay, to understand the emergence of the feminine leader, I'm going to draw on the concept of post-feminism. And we might ask ourselves, what is post-feminism? This is not an easy concept to explain, and there are many different interpretations of it. But one dominant one which is emerging is the idea that it is the coexistence of liberal feminist values alongside the restabilisation of traditional gender norms. The feminist values which are now mainstreamed are an agreement and a valuing of the principle of equality. Within this context, what this means is that women can seek equality, seek to be treated in the same way as their male colleagues, and also they can seek full economic freedom. The restabilisation of traditional gender norms means that the valuing of equality and women being granted economic freedom does not mean the throwing out of traditional femininity, if you like. It is a reworked notion of those particular gender norms. So we now live in an era where there's two sides to our experience of it: equality alongside tradition. To explain this a little bit further, post-feminism has reworked feminism as such. What it has reworked is that while liberal feminism previously was anti-femininity because it saw it as a barrier which held women back, that anti-femininity has shifted and changed, and so femininity is still valued and traditional gender norms have been restabilized. At the same time, liberal feminism also in the 1970s would have identified systemic elements of our society which acted as barriers to women achieving full equality, such as masculine cultural values, masculinity being highly valued and privileged over femininity. In a post-feminist era, the reworking of feminism, though equality as a concept has been taken up and valued highly, achieving full economic freedom, seeking to gain that senior management position is solely understood in terms of individual activity. So if you look at Sheryl Sandberg's TED lecture, for example, what she emphasizes is the individual behaviors of women. If you want equality, if you want to build a career, if you want that senior management position, it's down to you. You must get your head in the game. She argues that you must come to the table, don't hold back, don't leave before you leave, don't think, even if you think you want to have a family, don't just, in your mind, leave before you've actually gone. Build the networks, make connections with people who can help you climb the corporate ladder. But all of this is understood in terms of individual behavior, individual activity. Within post-feminist feminism, there is no recognition or no acceptance that there may be systemic elements, structural elements that impact or may act as a barrier on women securing those senior management positions or building a career. The other element of post-feminism is the reconfiguration of femininity. On this slide here, you can see a contrast between traditional femininity and post-feminist femininity. Traditional femininity, often referred to as emphasized femininity, highlights the fact that women should be passive, that they should be attractive, that they should stroke men's egos, that they shouldn't be too aggressive, that they should look pretty, that they be social. They're not expected to display technical competence. They look after the men, they put everybody else ahead of themselves, and they see being a wife and mother as a central aspect of who they are. 1970s liberal feminism would have seen that understanding of femininity as a barrier for women, holding them back, something they should leave. In a post-feminist gender regime, post-feminist femininity doesn't see femininity as a problem, but it is a reconfigured femininity that it promotes, if you like. Women are not just expected to be just a woman these days. They are expected to enact a combination of masculine and feminine behaviours. These masculine behaviours, which liberal feminism sought, individuality, being agentic, allowed to show ambition, be competitive, strive to achieve whatever it is that you want. Those are central in a post-feminist gender regime. But alongside that, there's also a maintenance, if you like, of traditional gender norms. So women are expected to do masculinity and femininity. You can't, the argument goes, be a woman today and be feminine unless you do a combination of masculine and feminine behaviours. So that's being individualistic, autonomous, etc., agentic, ambition, alongside being nurturing, caring, empathetic, collaborative, looking after people around you. My argument is that to understand the feminine leader, the emergence of that particular organisational figure, and also to understand the experience of that organisational figure, we can do so by drawing on the concept of post-feminism. And I'll illustrate this with reference to two contemporary organisational leaders. Here we have Mark Bolland and Harriet Green, both CEOs of British companies which have international brands. Mark Bolland has been CEO of Marks and Spencer's for the past 6 years. He took up the position in 2010. He has announced this January that he will be leaving in April 2016. He was brought on board to bring Marks and Spencer's out of its doldrums, which it has been in really since around 1999, and he was to bring back Marks and Spencer's to its former glory. You can see from some of the figures on that slide there that he didn't quite achieve this. He would argue that he has laid the foundations for future greatness for Marks and Spencer's. But others, say people in the city looking at it, would argue that, well, actually, it was a mediocre mid-table organisation when he took it over, and he's leaving it as a mediocre mid-table organisation, when he's leaving in April. The question we might ask is, why is it that he was allowed to stay for so long? Because being a CEO these days is like being a football manager. If you don't get the results, you're out. And it can be pretty brutal. But he stayed for 6 years despite poor results. Now, if you contrast his experience to that of Harriet Green, who came in to rescue Thomas Cook from bankruptcy, it was on the verge of collapse. So she turned this organisation around in dramatic fashion. She said herself at the beginning it wasn't going to be a minor tweak, it would be a significant change and organisation, but she did it. Within the space of 2 years, the share price increased from 13 pence to £1.70, and the valuation of the company went from 148 million to just under 2 billion. And Harvard Business School have made a case study of how she rescued and turned around Thomas Cook. What did Thomas Cook do in response to this fantastic, achievement on her part? They invited her to leave. And this was just after 2 years in post. Why is it? If you compare her results to Mark Bolland, she did an astounding job. Fantastic. Her business, we must all respect her business acumen. Mark Bolland didn't. Over the years, the results have not been great. He stayed, she was invited to leave. You might argue it's connected to maybe he's a nicer guy than she is, but even if you look at her in comparison to another CEO who's currently in post, being difficult and awkward and tough in leadership positions is not unusual. In Tesco, the current CEO is referred to, his nickname is Drastic Dave Lewis, because of his cost-cutting zeal when he worked at Unilever. He has been in post 1 year. The results of his first year have just come out this January, and in terms of like-to-like sales for just gone by for Christmas, there's been a slight increase. But it will be interesting to see how long he stays there, in the sense of how, depending on what his results are. But my point of looking at him alongside Harriet Green as well is to say, being a leader often means that you have to be tough, okay? So Harriet Green was tough. She had to. She was saving a company with 29,000 employees and over 23 million customers. You don't save an organisation like that from bankruptcy by simply being nice and giving group hugs. Steve Jobs, everybody, since his death, and the biographies that have emerged, all say what a tough guy he was. Did Apple ask him to leave at the height of his powers? Of course they didn't. Why was Harriet Green asked to leave? In my view, one of the reasons was because of this issue of post-feminism, the coexistence of masculine and feminine behaviours, and the demands that women, in management positions or in life in general, have to enact both alongside each other. So she was one of 10 women running a FTSE 250 company. She was seen as a key business leader, but she was asked to go. If we look at her own account of herself and those who worked with her account of her behaviour, in my view, it's because she was too masculine and had not enough feminine. She's very feminine in her appearance. She gets her hair blow-dried every morning, like Anna Wintour of Vogue in America. She wears beautifully cut clothes, lovely high heels. She looks very feminine in her appearance. However, in terms of her behaviour, she's, tough. She's not group hugs and nurturing. She says that herself. She makes decisions quickly. And she, when she's certain about something, she's got the confidence to go with it. So she met her husband, and within 7 seconds, she knew she was going to marry him. She says about herself, she's not with her family during the week. She might, she'll breakfast with people, and she may have lunch with you if you eat salad. I love that quote. She also says of herself, she doesn't deal particularly well with needy people, but she can fake sympathy if required. All of these statements that she makes about herself display the fact that she is more masculine, if you like, in her behaviours around people than she is, displaying femininity or giving people hugs all the time. However, that doesn't mean that she completely dismisses those who she works with. Those who have commented on the way she leads say that she is always very concerned about her team and takes them into account, and she is very, very pro 360-degree feedback. So it's not about disregarding people or ignoring them. It's just that when she's managing, she does it in a strong, confident, dominant, serious way. Okay? She said, you can't transform a company like Thomas Cook in less than 6 years. A Thomas Cook insider said, well, she's probably going a little bit earlier when they invited her to leave. But if your management style is grabbing people by the neck and shaking them, well, then what do you expect? Well, I think Steve Jobs grabbed lots of people by the neck and shook them, but did Apple throw him out? No, they didn't. Because as a man, I would suggest it was easier for him to do masculine behaviours, to be dominant, to be difficult. It is much more difficult for women to enact those kind of behaviours. So my interpretation of this situation is that in a post-feminist gender regime, how we are as men and women has changed, particularly for women. Women are now required to do a combination of both masculine and feminine. Look feminine, behave feminine, but also enact masculine behaviours and practices. Be individualistic, be strong, be dominant, make decisions, but you have to do the two together. What research indicates, and what the experience of someone like Harriet Green also demonstrates, though, does this mean, if we're talking about the feminine leader, is this a new era for women in organisations or women in leadership? And I think we need to temper our optimism. Women can do masculinity as long as they do it alongside femininity. They can be tough leaders as long as, on the other side, they are feminine as well. So they have to, if you like, be a little bit schizophrenic, do both together at one and the same time. They are allowed to be more or less female, but not more or less male. So while in the past, being too masculine in your work was perceived as a problem, women can now do masculinity, but it must be tempered or alongside displays of femininity. The other issue around feminine behaviours and traits and characteristics for leadership is that they are not perceived as a skill for women. They are perceived as something natural. Because they're women, because they have female physical bodies, feminine displays of nurturing, care and empathy are expected and required of them. And they get no dividend from that. In contrast, male leaders, men in positions of power, not only can they enact masculinity, but they can also enact femininity as if they choose. If they want to be collaborative and nurturing and caring of their team and care about the motivation of those they're working with, all of those issues, they get a dividend for it. It's perceived as a skill because it's perceived as something they have to learn and needs to be honed. So for women, yes, they can now enter into positions, leadership positions, but they have to play this dual game, and it's a difficult one to get right. So finally, what I would finish up by saying is that historically, women were excluded from leadership positions because of their femininity. Today, they are included in and allowed access to leadership positions if that is what they desire, on the grounds of their femininity, but they cannot leave their femininity behind. It is still a requirement of them. So though we now have some inclusion in the context of organisations, and we can be optimistic about that, I think we need to be aware of the realities. It's not just open all doors for women to these positions of power today, they have to play a very careful game. And cultural norms in terms of how people perceive you are very, very important. Will they accept your authority? Will they accept your right to be in that position? That is not often down to your business acumen, as Harriet Green demonstrates, but rather down to people's perception of you as a woman and whether you're feminine enough in the context of displaying masculine behaviours. Thank you for listening.